Hi, I'm Christine Herman of Herman's Quality Meat Shop in Newark, Delaware. Welcome to my YouTube channel. In this video, we are going to be talking about this big piece of meat right here on my block. This is what we call the rump, or the bottom round roast of the steer. Are you ready? This guy's massive. This is from one big steer. And this, believe it or not, is just one muscle in the thigh of the steer. And it lays right next to the eye, the tip, what we call the sirloin tip, and the top round. And what I'm going to do right now, there is a seam. I'm going to flip it around in just a moment, and I'm going to take it out so you can see it, but because that is what I like to do. So I'm going to stop for just a moment, and I'm going to turn it, and I'm going to trim that out also. But as I flip it around, you can see, maybe not real clearly, but you can see this right there. And that's what I'm going to take out and make it into a really pretty roast. Because you may, if you buy at another store, a roast like this, a top round, bottom round, not top round, a rump or a bottom round roast. I got carried away. With this seam in it, there's nothing wrong with that. That's why they make steak knives at home, for you to use to trim that out yourself. We like to take this out whenever possible, and it's always possible, of course, because it makes for a little nicer roast for you, the customer. And use a little leverage here. And what this roast is excellent for Sunday dinner, another Sunday dinner, or a holiday meal. Christmas, Thanksgiving, take your pick. So I'm going to take this off, and you can see that silver right there. We're going to leave that aside, because we're not going to really worry about that. We're going to focus on making sure this roast looks beautiful for you. And you never want to cut towards yourself. You always want to cut away from yourself. So that's what I'm going to do right now. Let's trim this a little bit more and create a nice, beautiful roast. Take this vein out as well. This roast, a particular cut of meat, I'm going to call it a roast, but this particular cut of meat is also good for a couple of other cuts of meat and other recipes. For example, it's ideal for stew. It's ideal for Swiss steak. You can use it for stir fry, like a pepper steak, one that you would marinate for a little while. This has some beautiful marbling, which you can see right there. I'm actually going to set that aside. That doesn't need to be as visual. Has a lot of nice flavor in it. This is one of my favorite cuts of meat. It has a nice little bit of diamond fat inside that is just melts in your mouth. People kind of shy away from it when they see it, like, oh, it's fat. But fat is where the flavor is. You always want to keep that in mind. Not that I'm encouraging you to just eat fat, although that's a video for another time. But in general, the marbling, what we call marbling, which is what this is right here, is where the flavor is. And I'm going to trim this up. Take some of this heaviness out of there and help create a beautiful roast. I like to take a little bit of this off the bottom, but leaving some of the fat on the bottom helps give it some stability, if you will. Helps give a little bit of flavor, and then you can trim that at the table or before you carve it. It won't hurt at all, and it'll help keep the roast nice and moist also. And this is, as a whole, an oven roast, which means you will cook this on an open rack and bake it uncovered. Choose your seasonings, however you would like to have it flavored. Something simple as salt and pepper. If you wanted to add parsley, oregano, a dry rub. I've had some customers that have actually put this on a smoker. Certainly do that. I'm going to just trim it up a little bit, and I'm going to tie some strings around it. I like to tie the strings around roasts. Gives it a nice presentation. Makes it, to me, a little easier to cook, and it always gives you, the customer, guidance as to how to cut it when the time comes for you to cut your meat. Because there's nothing worse than having a beautiful piece of meat and cutting it the wrong way. You don't want to do that. So, here it is. Let's do something here. Make this a little easier for myself. Voila. So I'm going to tie this up. Again, you always want to be mindful where your tools are. I actually don't need this on my block. Make it easier for all of us. I think one more string will do it. And there you have another gorgeous piece of meat right there. It's a beautiful roast. I'll show you how it looks on the other side, tied, just like that. And again, this is a piece of meat that you don't have to buy the whole thing unless you're serving a big crowd, because this guy's probably a good 8+ pounds. So you would want to just take a portion of it, depending upon how many people you're serving. So let's go back to our cooking instructions. Open rack, my favorite. Foil, my second favorite. Position it, and in this case it's a little tight, but we'll make it work. Season it, again, keeping the strings on. You always want to cook it with the strings on. We always like to provide the fat. Not everybody likes the fat. Some people prefer not to, and we don't include it if you don't want it, or you can take it off, either way. And you want to make sure you cover the meat. That makes it moist. And you want to be sure to put some water on the bottom of the pan. I like to put a good inch of water. Come back. A nice, let's sneak this guy in here. A nice inch of water in the bottom of the pan. Of course, you want to be careful when you're transferring it from your counter into your stove and vice versa, that you don't spill that water, because that would be messy and you wouldn't be happy. And then you're going to bake this. You're going to preheat your oven to about 400 degrees. When it's nice and hot, you're going to put this in the oven. You're going to bake it for about 10 or 15 minutes. Reduce the temperature to 325 and bake it for a good, this size, something like this, probably a good 1.75 hours, depending upon how well done you like it. My suggestion is of somewhere around 135 to 145. It will continue to cook when you take it out of the oven and it's resting. You want to let it rest for a good 10 minutes. And that keeps the juices in, keeps it nice and moist. Again, I want to explain that this roast is not cooked. The oven is not cooking the roast this way. It's the air in the oven is circulating this way. So it's cooking short distance into the center. So I've had some confusion with that, so I want to make sure that I try and explain it in another regard. After it rests, take the fat off and slice it with the strings. Relatively thin as you're comfortable. If you want to do a thicker dinner slice, that's perfectly fine. It's a very tender piece of meat, and it will be delicious. Again, one of my favorites. So I hope you enjoyed that video talking about the rump bottom round roast. Thank you. My kitchen tip today is about soup starters. We've talked about in previous videos, I like to remind you to always keep certain things on hand. 3 of my favorite things to keep on hand are always carrots, celery, and onions. Garlic, of course, is the 4th thing that should always be kept handy. If you like to make soups or stews or even salads, it's great to have them handy, but especially if you are a soup and stew person, but you don't always have time to do the preparations. Spend an hour or 2 preparing ahead of time and then storing. So in this case, take your carrots and cut them up. However big, thick, small, whatever you like. In this case, I just recently made a pot of ham and bean soup. So I like chunkier vegetables for my ham and bean soup, something a little more that size. If I'm making like chicken noodle soup, I like something a little smaller. So I would do something more like this and cut up smaller vegetables. So what am I going to do with them next? I'm going to get a variety and put them in a bag. In this case, I'm just going to combine them all, but you can keep them separated. I can put all the carrots in one bag and take out what I want. I could put the celery in another bag, or I could do per recipe. However I want to do that. Take my celery and do the same thing. I'm going to take this guy out. I've already washed him. Now, one of the things I like in my soups, especially my chicken soup, are the leaves. I don't like the ends that are burnt or dried out, but I like the leaves in my soup. So again, I'm going to cut these kind of what I'm going to call rough cut. I've already pre-washed them, by the way, because I like mine chunky, depending upon my soup, my stew. Or you can just cut them into big strips like this if you're doing a stew. I did that the other day also. Made a pot of beef stew with a beautiful chuck roast, and I just had large pieces of vegetable like that. And in this case, I'm just going to put the carrots and celery in a bag. I love the leaves of the celery. So what I do with these guys right here, these leaves right here, they either go in my salad or in my soup. I love them. So we're going to just go like that real quick and put them in here. And now I've got a soup or stew starter right there. There's one bag. I would keep the onions and garlic separate. That's just me. And as you see, for 2 reasons, I have a cutting board on my block because I had raw meat on here. But also, whenever I do onion, I always keep my onion and garlic separate. So again, depending upon what I'm doing, rough cut it or chop it fine, up to you, however you want to do it. So you get the hint. I don't have to do all of this. You know what I'm talking about. You have it all set. This way, you can go in your freezer or in your refrigerator if you're planning ahead. Say you're making a salad and you've got your vegetables out. Well, you know tomorrow you're going to be making a stew or soup. Voila. You've got everything out. Do it all at once. Put it in the refrigerator and save it for tomorrow. Put everything in your crock pot in the morning. And when you're done working, if you're working from home, or somebody's at home to monitor, you're all set. Makes it really easy. So there you go. Let's go back to that soup for just a quick minute. I wanted to add something to it. I don't like to cook with a lot of salt, especially in my soups. However, one of my favorite soups to make is ham and bean. And we all know that smoked ham, whether it's a smoked shank or a piece of ham that's been smoked, is salty. What do you do about that? What I do and what I've learned is I take a baked potato, scrub it, Make sure you get the dirt off of it. Poke some holes in it. Drop it in the pot of soup while the ham is cooking, while it's still on the bone, and while it's adding flavor to the beans. And you might be wondering, well, that's kind of weird. Why am I doing that? Believe it or not, and you can try this, the salt is absorbed into the potato. And I thought, no, there's no way that's possible. Well, when I was done making my soup, all right, let me back up a step. So you're cooking your beans, you've soaked your beans, and you're cooking them, and then you add your ham and your ham hock and your bone, and you add the potato to it. When the ham is cooked, you take that out so that it's cool enough for you to shred. That's when you take your potato out. Take a bite. It's like eating raw salt. It is crazy. And your soup tastes delicious. It's amazing. Throw it away afterwards. You have no use for it, and it has just made your soup basically salt-free, which is crazy. You can then add some salt to it if you would like, but you may not even need to because the ham adds its own flavors from there. On the other hand, let's say, for example, you made a pot of chicken noodle soup. We'll go back to my chicken noodle soup example. And you've seasoned it and you taste it and you realize I added too much salt. What do? You could either put a piece of potato in the soup, or you can add a slice or two of apple and let it cook for another 10 minutes. And either the potato or the apple will absorb the salt. Discard them, and your soup is less salty. Cool tip, right? There you go. Two of my favorite tips right there. And I have another tip that I want to share on the other side. When you're making a pot of tomato sauce, and it's, as you and I know, tomato is acidic. What do you do about cutting that acidy flavor? Well, you can do a couple different things. You can add sugar, which makes your sauce sweet, and that's okay. You could do one of two other things. You could add like a teaspoon of baking soda, depending again how big your pot is, or my favorite, I just put it away. My favorite is taking a fresh carrot. Take your carrot, cut the ends off. You could either cut it into pieces, or you can grate it right in and add that grated carrot and blend it. If you want to cut it up into chunks and put in your tomato sauce and pull it out later, go right ahead. But it is delicious. It adds its own sweetness. You don't have to remove it, but it also cuts down on that acidic flavor that you get from the tomato sauce. So those were some fun tips, right? I hope you enjoyed that. Thank you so much. Rump roast, bottom round roast, delicious. Dinner for a crowd or two. You can take a small slice, you can cook the whole thing. You can do so many different things with this particular cut of meat. Highly recommend it. Delicious marbling, very tender, and very easy to cook. Give it a try sometime and let me know what you think in the comments below. Please remember to like our channel and definitely subscribe and share it with a friend so we can keep doing what we're doing here to bring you all of this great information. Thank you so much. God bless you.